Welcome back.
Good to be back.
Nice job, everyone. That was good. That was very good. I know it can be hard. Um, it's a practice that I'm encouraging everyone to actually use as their baseline practice. Unless there's something, if you have another meditation practice, actually, you can start with this one. Just I'll do that actually most of the times with my practice. I'll always start with the shamatha, and then from there I'll go into another type of meditation. So you can use this to start with before you start other meditation practices. If you don't have one, this is a great one to start with. Um, it's also helpful, I've talked about it a bit, but to have a journal. If you like to journal, this will be awesome for you. If you don't, it's kind of nice to actually just take it, just track, you know, how was it? Did your body hurt? Did your mind all over the place? Some days were easier, some days weren't. What times worked? What got to you? What didn't? What came up constantly that you couldn't seem to let go of? Um, the supine position, also known as Shavasana position, is also a great way to do it. If you do decide to do it at home, I recommend not doing it in bed, like waking up and be like, okay, I'm gonna meditate and lying in bed may not be the best way to start. If at the very least, like roll out of your bed and roll out a yoga mat or whatever you need to do, but have a designated area that you want to try it in. It is actually wonderful to try it in the supine position because um, it gets your body out of the way. It's harder in that it can make you sleepy and drowsy. But quite frankly, you're going to be sleepy or drowsy even if you're sitting. I mean, it's just a good way to get a sense of really how focused are you on the object itself, which is your mind. So see if you can do it. 24 minutes is really the recommended amount. Start. I would actually say probably start at 15 if the 24 feels too much, and then move up in 3-minute increments if you can. A timer is always nice to have. If you end up being obsessed about the time of what's left, then don't use a timer because then your object of focus becomes the clock and not what you're supposed to be meditating on. So use your discretion. Okay. Um, but I think what we're going to start doing is actually for course 2 that will start in November. We'll probably start each class with a decent lengthy meditation practice. Because if you're not doing it at home, at the very least, this will give you the time and space to know what it's like to do it, and at least give you some information of how to do it at home. And most importantly, too, is that a lot of these concepts, again, it will not get very far. It won't help you very much if you're not actually meditating and contemplating these ideas. And it's not contemplating these ideas to brainwash yourself. It's really to take a look and examine whether or not they even hold true for you or not. Um, does it work for you? Does it not work for you? Where are you getting stuck? Um, those things are important to have. But the important of this meditation in particular that's really nice is that we get so wrapped up in all these questions and things that we're thinking about, which we don't really spend time to just take a moment to take a step back. And what does that look like? And what this actually does is it teaches us how to actually have control over our mind so that we don't let our mind control us, because that's usually what happens for most of us. Our mind decides what we decide, what we're going to do, how we're going to act, how we're going to behave, right? So this gives you it actually gives you your awareness power over your mind of how it's ruled by these thoughts. And that's what this practice is. So I don't know if I shift it to like it's an empowerment practice. I don't know if that makes it sells it more, but it really is about giving you, it's empowering you in a very specific and particular way. Yeah. Okay. Um, so we're going to start class with our review for ACI 9, class 9. We're going to start with it with doing the homework. No, I'm sorry, not homework, the quiz. And we're going to break out into groups again. And we'll spend some time on this because I know it's a pretty heavy topic. And then we'll probably, I think we'll, and then I'll start a little bit on class 10 and then we'll take a break. Finish up class 10. I'm going to also leave hopefully a little time, about 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes at the end for like a Q&A, and then wrap up class 10. Okay. So this is the last class of the first course, just so that you all know. Next class, what we're going to do is do a review of the entire course using there's usually a final exam that you can take. If you are adamant, because I remember when I started this class, I really got excited about homework because I like to study. And so I was very particular about making sure I got to do the finals and the homeworks on my own. So if you're adamant that you really want to do the quiz on your own and not have the answers talked about, then you are more than welcome to do that. But what we'll do in classes, we'll use the final to gauge our review from the beginning to the end and go through from class 1 to class 10, which I think will be nice. I think it'll be nice because it will be a refresher for some of you. And if anything, you'll actually realize a lot that you do know. And you'll kind of be able to piece things together now that you've gone through the whole course and be like, oh, it makes sense a little bit more now on course 1. You know, for those of you that are joining us, don't sweat it. It'll be a nice way to plant the seeds, and you'll get whatever you need. I promise you in course 2. Okay.
Are the classes on YouTube?
Yeah, all the classes are also on YouTube. Yeah, if you want to listen to them. Yeah. So I wanted these groups to be a little bit smaller. So I have 5 groups that we're going to do. I want to do groups of, wait. So let's do 5 groups of 3. Sound good? So pick a friend, a new friend,
Neighbor.
neighbor.
Right. Two computers.
You guys.
Awesome. And then, what's your name? Barbara, nice to meet you. And Gia. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, you were here. He's the one. Yeah. And then if we have to. Yeah.
I know.
The first question is.
Oh, it's the. Like.
Name the 2 shoots. And the size of
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So
the 2 shoots.
it's like.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'm like.
So, accepted reality. Accepted reality is one of them. What is
No.
And the assessment is goal. And do you want to explain?
Oh, yeah, so this is the acronym. And then, Yeah.
So.
And then the other one is like just stuff that you like your
So the first one is,
Or like,
oh, I see that, and reminds me of my grandfather.
yeah, 'cause it's like where you think that you've done like it's like the production that you're on. It's not true.
Oh,
Things
it's,
are not like don't have meaning in it unless projection.
That's not what it really is.
Yeah, that's not reality. And then also the reality is
I
like
wish I could
reality.
see, I remember this seeing certain weird things.
Yeah, it's when
When you see,
reality is when
you
things
just
don't
see
have
exactly what
information.
it's empty.
Like they don't have any.
Mine thinking
It's
is
like when things
space has a
don't have any
direction, mine
meaning
thinking
from
exists
them.
on my projections of my grandfather.
Oh, do I mean? Yeah,
My
same
idea
thing.
of what mine was just like when
Or actually,
I think all three groups.
So it's like.
Because
Oh, yeah.
if I don't have
Yeah.
what it sees on the
Oh,
computer.
everything has
And itself, and it calls self.
Yeah, so everything has
No mind.
I think it's just like how things.
It's a negative, so like things. So dogs see it one way, and see another. Oh, it's really the way I see it? No. It's not really the way I see it. Even that's depending on. You can say, whatever it is, depend on things starts.
I'm familiar with it, but you guys know better than us. Not
So, you go first. You know, let her try. How was Tom's?
Yeah.
What is, when we say this is deceptive reality?
It's like.
We think they exist depending on their own. They exist independent. That exists because they are the lesser projections. No one see the reason I'm forcing those kind of people down there every year is just depending on projections. Hinayana, is a
Okay, great. Oh, yeah. Then there's like a break. And then.
There are 3 phases for investigation.
I mean, I missed a few, but. that most of them.
The recognition.
Yeah, there's probably like they're trying to do more about than do that.
Start with
They think that they believe that something like this, you would cause.
This is
Yeah.
So that the object exists. This the object is eventually forced upon any
doesn't exist.
Wait till they're making podcasts? No, oh, no, no, sorry. Oh, I thought you were no, I can do it.
But it's also
It's really good.
Yes.
Address that
Right, right.
We're also not.
It's funny because I'm trying from starting this.
Well, these two are Mahayana as well. Yeah, this is Mahayana, this is Mahayana. Write that down. Yeah, these two are.
She was meditating in it.
This one's definitely Mahayana.
Yeah.
It's in Sanskrit.
So I don't know line. This place was really to my house. So I don't know if
Yeah.
First one
Very similar.
Yeah.
But not that
Leave out the perception. That's just. Last one is Mahayana.
very easy.
Yeah.
Just let's make
They don't exist in what you see. They exist
Where installation of the product.
you can do it online.
No,
but I wouldn't get too hot.
I
Like,
go Thursday nights.
so, yeah, they're doing a review class and then
They have daily.
second series.
sessions, and they're actually going
I'm
to.
sure that's still pretty basic.
Our experience.
Yeah, but-
That's what the.
No,
Not 14, yeah,
So,
yeah.
gearing up. I didn't.
Oh, yeah, there's 14, yeah, but that's only 2 hours. It's 7, yeah. Well, yes, every year.
I'm just gonna dig in here. Hold on to that in here. Got all these wealthy. But anyway, so they sort of cleaned up. But it's interesting because it's a,
He was put on the
a song that's like, you know, I just tell you,
his teacher was,
It's not.
but it's also, it's almost 24, you know, it's
Yeah.
almost, okay, right? So, and then. And not only those people, you've been sitting for years.
It doesn't exist on its own side, so it doesn't have self. Instead,
I know.
That's what
so an object doesn't exist.
Yes, so you can.
It doesn't exist. It doesn't have a self.
Yeah.
Remember, something that started.
Yeah, I will say though, there's a way you get to know people. You know, it's really, it's kind
Feelings of
there's this person behind this person. And, you know, the song that really gives you support.
Okay, here we go. All right. First question, name the two truths and describe them briefly. Who wants to take a stab at this? What's one of the two truths? Please. Yes, newcomers. What's one of the two truths? What's the first one?
Truth?
Truths.
Okay, deceptive.
Deceptive
and
truth?
ultimate.
Truth. So we have deceptive truth and ultimate truth. So we have two truths, we said, and deceptive truth. This is the Tibetan for it, in case you wanted to know. Because that excites some of the people in this room, clearly. If it's not on your homework, you can also write it, or your quiz. So who wants to take a stab at what deceptive truth is? Go for it.
Yeah. I can read it.
You want to read it? Okay.
Just three.
Mhm.
One is, parts, dependent upon the parts, and one,
You're on the next question.
No, the first one, deceptive truth.
cause and effect. Oh, I'm sorry. I need to go. We're still here.
Yeah, we should read that out.
Okay. All right. Self-assistant.
That things are self-existent. That's deceptive truth. Do we agree with that? Do we want to add to that? Do we disagree to that?
Things appear to us different than they are.
That things appear differently than they are. What's another way that you're thinking about it or you'd say it?
It's like your mind projects whatever it thinks is reality.
Yeah. Right. So it is actually a nice hodgepodge of all those three ideas, right? That when you see the idea of deceptive truth is that when you see something, that it's not really self-existently real, right? So if I were to do the pen again, that the pen is not self-existently real, but in fact that you projected something onto this pen and decided to label it pen, right? Is the idea. Does that sound right? Yeah. And what's ultimate truth? Ultimate truth?
It's when things, you realize that they don't have a nature of their own.
Yeah, when you realize they don't have a nature of their own. Yeah. So last week I was thinking about this even more and a better way to explain it. And I was thinking it's like, and at some point we can actually do more meditations like this, an emptiness meditation. But if I were to hold this what looks like a scarf up, right? If I hold my scarf up, your mind first does something where you say, oh, there's an object, right? The first level thing your mind does is object. The second thing it usually does is then it labels the object. Object, scarf. Then it goes to usually object, scarf, blue, white, right? Or black, white, whatever color you see, right? Pattern. And then it goes from object, scarf, black, white pattern, I like. Or object, scarf, black, white pattern, I don't like. And that sequence of events that you actually come up with in your own mind with everything that you do in the world becomes your reality of what this is. So suddenly this is something you like or you don't like based on what? In the last school, which we'll go through this obviously, but based on what? Based on your karma, based on your past karma that is forced upon you to have an opinion about this for whatever reason you have. Because in this room, there are 15 different projections of what this is. Anything from, I don't know what the hell that is, and I don't know why she's wearing it, to, oh, I like that. I can see that with something I would wear, right? Does that make sense? So those are the two realities happening that happens. That the first reality is that you go through this process and then you label something. But the second reality, the ultimate reality, is that this doesn't exist self-existently. Because if it did exist self-existently, this would be a scarf that you like to everybody. Does that make sense? Self-existent is a tricky word. You know, who's having it's a hard, it's like if this existed on its own, right, it would be that to everybody, everything, all the time. Yes.
I just have a weird question. So if we can all agree that it's what you're saying,
Yeah.
I mean, we're all looking at this at once, and a child looks at it and turns it into a toy snake.
Yeah.
Like dog grabs it and
Rips it
it's
apart.
different, right? It's
Yes,
different.
yes.
So is there what could we say it is if everyone could agree on that is, because we can't, right? It's,
Yeah, that's a
you know
good
what I mean?
question.
Like what could we all
What do we all
agree
do?
that this thing, this object, this idea is?
Right.
Is there a way to talk about that a little
Yeah,
bit?
sure,
So
for
because
sure.
It would help maybe clarify
Sure.
the emptiness
Yeah.
vibe, you know?
Right. So let's you would all agree that there's something here. I think we can all agree with that. The question is, what is here? We can all agree with that. Like there's something here. And with this philosophy, there's something here, but what is it? What the concept of emptiness is, whatever projection that you have that comes from you that you put onto this, that projection that you have, it's a filter basically that you've created and you've projected. If I took that filter off, what would be here? There's something. But you can't have a unanimous agreement to everything. That's why it's empty. And that's why there's karma. And that's why we're going to talk about the connection of the two together today.
Mhm.
But there is no unanimous idea.
Right.
That's why it's important to look at that. It's almost, I mean, if I were to water down the idea, the philosophy, it would be like saying there's different perspectives on everything, right? But it gets deeper than that. It's not just a different perspective. You know, it's much more subtle than that and much more profound than that. Because when you say there's a different perspective on something, you're still saying that it exists self-existently. You're still saying that it's still, you know, well, it's still a scarf, but it's my scarf versus, you know, my pretty scarf versus my ugly scarf. You make it self-existent. So the concept here is that it doesn't exist self-existently. It doesn't exist on its own. It's dependent on something. What is it dependent on? And in the different schools, it's dependent on either, we'll talk about that soon here. So, yes.
No, maybe this is beyond that now.
Yeah.
The question is ultimately like coming to terms or beginning to understand emptiness help us coexist? Because
Yes, absolutely.
Because
totally.
we're beginning to like understand the way that we all
Yeah.
or
Absolutely.
aware of how our minds work.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Yeah. Well, you don't.
If
First,
I just saw that and that's a beautiful scarf, I can't believe how amazing it is. That's what it is.
yeah.
And then someone turns around and says, that's a piece of shit.
Yeah.
And then that's when two beings
Totally.
go at one another
Totally.
and create.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
So if we were all these two people, in theory, were able
Sure.
to get that.
Yeah. If we were all the Buddha,
we'd all begin to.
yeah. If we were all the
So-
Buddha, could we coexist? Totally.
I guess I'm asking,
Yes.
what is the studying for? You know, what is the teaching for? Like for this one.
In particular, this
Well,
teaching.
you know, like,
Yeah. I mean,
leading to-
yeah. No joke. I mean, this teaching is really ultimately to get you enlightened, so
Right.
that you can.
So that stuff is going.
This is directly the idea that
Yeah.
you get this, and it will get you into what's called the stream, so that you can be enlightened.
And then you're kind of
Totally.
going like.
Yeah, you just go right into
pushing
it.
through
Mhm.
past the other.
If you understood if you understood what these two truths are, when you are watching the debates and you have an opinion about Trump, right? Right? And what's happening in this world, then you wouldn't have the conflict that you have. It just wouldn't happen because you wouldn't see him self-existently. Like I was watching a video that's been going on Facebook of who was it? Not the actor. What's his name?
Oh, yeah.
De Niro.
Yeah.
That was doing that piece, and he's like making this proclamation about how much Trump sucks, and this is what he's fearful of, and it was kind of him corralling this certain type of injustice that this man represents. And it was interesting because people that I know that see it are like, God, that's so cool. That's so awesome. And I think they just love the fact that he's taking a stake in the ground.
Mm-hmm.
But what's so fascinating in that point is that I'm watching it and thinking, how many people are actually looking at what's happening with Trump in the world and wondering, how did I manifest that man in the world? Because we all contributed to some degree to have him manifest in our life. You cannot see arrogance if you don't have the seeds of arrogance in you. It's not possible. It's not possible. You know what I mean? You just don't. You don't have the seeds for arrogance. So how could you possibly project arrogance on something if you don't have the seeds? Right? So whatever you see in the world, it obviously has to be seeds that have been planted in your mind for you to actually experience that. Because if your mind is pure, and you've seen people who are very naive who don't get it, right? They just don't it just doesn't register. It's just nothing. Doesn't make any sense. So it's interesting to see what happens with like Trump is such an interesting example because you see that in the vein of goodness, what happens that gets reinforced even further is a self-existent nature of good versus bad, right? Yes.
But we can still address as far as just communicating with people.
Yeah.
Like the scarf or anything else. Like we can address it as a
Just not Trump.
functional object.
Sure.
Like we can agree
Sure.
on the function that it
Of
could
course.
serve.
Right, because we have deceptive reality and ultimate reality. And those two realities must, so that you can function in this world, right, must work hand in hand. You can't just be like, oh, it's all a projection of my mind, so I'm going to go off this bridge and leave because I can fly, right? I mean, that would be a terrible way to actually think of it. It's not true, right? It's not true. Until you have reached a certain level of unless you've become enlightened, that's not your reality that you live in. So you are actually parallel pathing both these concepts at all times and trying to see how do you flip it and what does that be? And as you start to purify your mind and as you start to have realizations, you will, in fact, there's a term that we have called Kairim, but that you'll hear in the Buddhist practice, but you're not trying to transform things. You will actually start to see that it will transform on its own. But that comes with the practice, and that comes with the purification of your mind. The more you purify your mind, you will purify samsara. That's how it works.
And that's through meditation.
That's through meditation. That's through virtue and ethics. That's through the three principal paths, right? That's through all the things that we've been studying. So this course is interesting because it gives you a very high level overview of what we're studying from beginning to end of the 18 courses. So then each course does a deeper dive of each topic, and some go for 3 courses, in fact. Yes.
Could you explain a little bit of the the aspects of transformation that you're speaking about.
Yeah.
And what, I'm sure it's different from everyone.
Yeah.
And they come in different forms and different subtle ways.
Yeah.
But in your experience of what you've heard about or read, what I'm not saying, what am I looking for?
Sure.
Because I'm sure you'll see it when you're ready.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. You'll see it when it happens.
When it happens,
Yeah.
it's sort of,
Yeah.
it can
Yeah.
be going on and you may not.
No, you'll know.
You'll know, like,
Yeah.
it'll go, okay, you'll
Yeah.
pick up on it.
Yeah, you'll see it. You'll
Yeah.
know. Yeah. Yeah, you'll know. Okay. Okay, number 2, functionalist group. What is the functionalist group? What do they believe in? Cherry?
That it's cause and effect, so the world is created based on a series of causes, produce a result.
Right. Interdependent group. Nova?
Things depend on their parts.
Nice. And the implication group.
That things exist depending on our projections and labels.
Yeah. So each one of these levels are, it's not that one is wrong versus another. And on that note, I also want to make it very clear that as practitioners, there is no right or wrong. I mean, there is a right or wrong, but there's really no right. Like, because then you start to play with the self-existence of like who is what and what is right or wrong. And that becomes a thing. These ideas are 3 very subtle ideas of ways that we define dependent origination in these 3 different schools. If you're very interested in it, you spend time and actually can do meditations to see the subtleties of each one. But the general idea with the functionalist group, the independent group, and the implication group is that if things were self-existent, then they would just exist independent from anything. Yeah, so this would just exist, poof, it would just exist. But the fact is that this exists dependent on something, right? It doesn't just randomly exist on its own. It's dependent on something. And so the 3 schools basically look at it and have subtle ways of describing what is it dependent on? Does that make sense? It's dependent on either it's been caused, it's been dependent on its parts, or it's been dependent on your projection. And each one builds upon each other. So for the example that I had originally, you can take something like, okay, I'm meditating on this object. I see an object, right? And you same exercise, object. It's been caused by something. It's been created by something. It didn't just randomly appear. Because the fact is that every day we interact with things as if it just appears, right? Like you go to the grocery store, you buy something, it's just there. And when it's out, it's annoying, right? Or whatever, right? So things have been caused. They've been created, they've manifested, and they've been caused. The second thing is then you start looking at saying, well, this has been caused. What is it? And then you start looking at and labeling it. But how do you decide to label that it's a cup? Because you start to identify, well, it has the shape of what I would identify. It has a certain type of shape, it has this lid. It looks like it's clear with fluid inside of it. There is a straw. There's some sort of object that goes in. So you identify each part of it, and then you suddenly look at it, and then what do you say? You bring all that data together, and you say, cup. And then from there, after you do that, then it goes even further, and then you define what kind of cup. Is it, do I like this cup? Do I not like this cup? Is it recycled? Is it not? Whatever, right? Does that make sense? So there's a subtlety in each way of how it progresses, the process progresses. Okay.
Do the 3 schools of thought only deal with deceptive truth with your projection of how like they came about? Because it seems like they won't really deal with ultimate truth, since ultimate truth is kind of just like a fact.
Yeah, so the idea is that they deal with how you actually will get to the ultimate truth. So if you look at the highest school, which is what we focus on, right, with the implication school, your projection of your mind then tips you into understanding the ultimate nature of what this must be.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Otherwise, you would just be like, oh, it's self-existently a cup.
Yeah. So it's not just how they exist, it's like how.
It's what they're dependent upon.
Yeah.
How they exist, what they're dependent upon, and realizing that what they're dependent upon has to do with your projection. In which case, if that's true, then it raises the question of, then this must be empty, because you're projecting onto something that's here and labeling it cup that you like or don't like. Yeah.
So if things existed like you said they don't,
Mhm.
like
No, they exist.
No, but you said like they just exist on their own. Like
They're
that.
not self-existent.
Right,
Yeah.
like you were saying, it would not be able to change them, right? It would have to just be that.
That's right.
Forever,
Yeah,
a
that's right.
Piece of it changing.
That's correct.
It is it.
Yeah,
No
it would be
matter
permanent all the time. So
To every being.
to every being,
To every being,
Yeah.
always.
and
Forever.
perceived a certain
The
way.
water can't evaporate. It has to just be almost like
Yeah.
solid.
Yeah. Well, the cup could never.
Never like.
And it's the same thing with people, right?
Which is impossible because like light is shining on it in a different way. It's moving.
Totally.
Every aspect of it is constantly in flux.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And we've also talked about how, like, when you look, well, this is a little tricky. It's more deceptive. So let's use this one. Some things are less. But if I look at something like this,
So it's hard.
it's, you look at it and you don't really even know what the backside of this cup is. I mean, it might be a mirror and I'm staring at myself and checking myself out. You have no idea. It might just look like it's a cup on this side. So even with the idea of the parts, right? The second school is that you deduce information by deciding, you fill in the gaps, the blanks, and then you decide, oh, that must be a cup because it has a certain type of shape. It's something that I identify with for whatever reason. It has a color, I'm perceiving it a certain way of these parts. It has a handle. You bring all that information together and then suddenly you say, this plus this plus this equals cup. Right? It's like the same, they'll give you an example in the scriptures about a mirage. When you're in I don't really like desert, but anyway, but if you were in the desert, and you see a body of water from a distance, it looks like it's a body of water, but it's not when you get up closer. It's just, it's almost a hallucination of your mind. And in a way, what we're saying is that's basically what's happening every day with us. We walk around and we think this is all real. Not that it doesn't exist, but it's real in a way that's not, it's deceptively true. In the class in the retreat that I had, my teacher talked about it like very similar to a dream. Like when you're dreaming, it feels so real. All of it feels so real, doesn't it? Your mind feels so, all of it. And there's nothing about it in that moment unless you know how to do lucid dreaming, which is a whole different thing. Lucid dreaming, where you actually know you're awake during a dream and you can actually move in a dream. It's a type of practice, but it feels very real, But when you're dreaming, even right in the dream state, all the things that are happening in that dream, all the people that you see in that dream, where are they coming from? Only one place I can be coming from. They're not self-existent, clearly, right? They're clearly coming from your mind, yet it feels that real.
And your projections that you put on things come from your previous karma?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. It's coming from something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Number 3, Buddhism teaches that no self exists. Give a description of this non-existent self or self-nature according to Master Chandakirti. Armando.
So the dak is the word for self, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then gotcha,
Mhm.
self-existent.
Yeah.
So it's an object doesn't exist on its own side.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. Yeah, that things are not self-existent. So in particular, we talked about Doc last last two classes, that meant self, and that there's no self and there's no self nature in self, right? When you hear of self, it's not like I don't exist self, but that I myself don't even I myself do not have a self-existent nature, right? So when you understand these concepts that you're looking at, the reason why you would, one reason amongst a few, but one reason why you would be all living in peace, for one, is that you're not taking things personally. It's impossible. Why would you take something, it's like your boss is screaming at you, and yet that's a projection from your mind that you created and manifested. If you understood where that comes from and the emptiness of your teacher, why would you take that personally? It's like the same thing as like if I had a monitor up here of someone screaming at you, would you take that personally? That's why it's so interesting about Trump, because he's up there on these screens and people get really, really upset and they take it so personally. It's fascinating, but it's a projection that you have on him, because you can have another guy. It could be, it's so interesting with the debates because it seems like a reality show. And I'm like, is this a joke? Can I put the channel? There's a real one, So interesting. But that's the same idea, is that if things are a projection of your mind, you wouldn't take it personally, because you'd understand it's a karma that's ripening, it's happening, and it will go away in that moment. And it's something that happened from your past. And that in that moment, at the same time, you are forced upon, because of your past karma, to see your boss a certain way. You can't control it, right? Because if it wasn't forced upon you, you can control how you feel, right? So if your partner's yelling at you, you'd be like, if you can control that, it'd be no problem. But you can't. Or when you get anxious, or when you look at crappy weather, it's almost like forced upon you. You almost like can't control that feeling, that upheaval that happens of, oh, it's such a crappy day, it's raining, I'm identifying rain, so you identify rain and cold with a certain type of thing, which is so interesting being New Yorkers. I grew up in the Northwest, and then actually I love a certain type, like that cloudy, gray, dampy, like misty rain weather is so comforting to me. When it's sunny out every day, it flips me out. It makes me very cranky. It does. Like, I don't like the beach. It's not something I'm used to. And it makes me cranky. Whenever there are yoga retreats at beach, I'm like, not going, check. It's just not my thing. No joke. Yeah. I'm not that kind of person. So if the beach meant beauty and comfort and relaxation to all beings, then it would be that for all of us. But clearly it's not, because I am very clear that it's not something that I really enjoy. I like the sand, makes me feel sluggish. I feel sloppy. I feel bloated. I don't know. It's just not my thing. Yeah. Okay. So the idea of self, and it's important, is that if you want to start to understand this practice, then in particular to self, no self means that you don't exist self-existently. That's not what's happening. Make sure I have that up there for you guys. I'm sorry.
How were you supposed to go through that?
Yes. That's dependent origination. Those are the 4 main schools. Oh, by the way, if you do want this chart, email me, please, and I'm happy to send it to you.
What's your email?
I emailed everybody today, but it's JEEXACI at Gmail. So Doc is tricky in that when we talk about the no self-existent nature of something like a cup or this mug, right? Or this scarf, it's a little easier to consider that. But when you think of self, it's a little harder. And it's something to consider. These classes are difficult and they're challenging, and I'm direct in some ways, I know, And I don't bring up these ideas just to be provocative. That's really not the point at all. And there will be ideas that will be raised based on scripture that will have great conflict with how you perceive yourself and your world. And things will come up, and it will make you question a lot of things. In those moments when you do have that time, when that time happens and those things happen for you, watch how you deal with that. Because in that moment, if you do start to reinforce the practice of, well, I'm so offended, or I can't believe, or how can when things like that rise, watch where your focus is. Because and it's the same in the world. When you go into the world, watch how much you start to reinforce the self-existent nature of you. I, me, this belongs to mine. What does that really mean? And watch it, because if you're doing this practice, I'm not saying that you're going to walk out and be able to not grasp at the self-existent nature of yourself. That's hard. That's a hard thing to do. But just take a break and take a look and say, that's interesting. I just realized I did that. And that's as good as it can get. And that's okay there. That's okay. But just observe that moment. Because the self-existence of self is a big, it gets in the way so much of our Buddha nature.
It's amazing how like you realize how self-centered you are.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
The other day,
yeah.
I was like kind to this lady because she was like shy at some community service events I was at.
Yeah.
And like my group met again yesterday, and long story short, we learned that like she, like very recently, she had a lot of issues with her boyfriend. He became whatever, like she was going through a bunch of stuff, and I was like, wow, like I thought I was so like kind and all this stuff. I was like, that just made me feel good since I was kind to her and outgoing to her when she looked shy and I brought her into a group.
Yeah.
But actually, she was going through so much more than I even realized, and I was focused on like how I was helping her and how great I was instead of like maybe she was only shy that day because of like who knows. But I was like, wow, I'm like not as great as I think I am.
Yeah. Or well, no, I mean it's good. It's good to rejoice in your kindness and generosity. You should, and it's tricky because Buddhist practitioners do get into a place where they're like, oh no, you don't need to be, there's no false modesty. Be truthful, be accurate. When you've been done good, acknowledge that you've done good, and understand that there's a good karma that you've planted by doing it. Just watch your motivation and your intention. And the more you watch it, you start to look at it, gets more and more subtle and more subtle. And you're like, before it was 50-50, 50% I feel good, 50%, I'm giving. And there's an acknowledgement. And then it starts to get less and less and less, where it really doesn't have to do with you. But you start to watch that, and you'll watch, it's very, very subtle, but there's no good, I think, and there's no virtue in false modesty. Be truthful and accurate, and acknowledge when you have done good and rejoice in that. It's very important, to say, I spent time tonight to go to class when I could have done a bazillion other things. And I'm going to acknowledge the fact that I've done that, because we don't do that enough. We spend most of our time really meditating on our problems and our issues and how messed up we are.
So can you explain how an example of rejoicing?
Yeah, it's acknowledging, right? It's taking that moment and acknowledging the good that you've done. And it's just giving yourself that it's really like a pat on the back. Like, you know what, Armando, you did a great job tonight. And acknowledge that and be okay with that and sit in that and relish in that. You don't need to like puff up your chest and make it a big thing.
You don't have to be arrogant.
No, there's you have to be careful with that, but it's okay to do that. But that being said, it's true with how we even talk about what's right and what's wrong. Like, no, you're right, I'm wrong, or I'm right, you're wrong. There's this thing, even in that moment, there's a sense of a self-existence. Who am I? And who is that person? If that person is in fact empty of herself, what am I arguing with her for? First of all, A. And why am I trying to reinforce the self-existence of me and her by creating this separation of I'm right and you're wrong. That makes no sense. Makes no sense. Doesn't work that way.
Mhm.
You know? Okay. That's gotcha. Great. Yes.
I don't understand about the non-self existence of self.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there is always something. Like,
Yes.
okay, let's go. I don't want to go to the mind philosophers, but
Yeah.
there's always something that makes me focus on things. There's my consciousness. Right?
Sure. There's an awareness of your there's your
Yeah,
consciousness.
so-
There's an awareness.
When we are talking about self,
Yeah.
we are not talking about my consciousness, I suppose. We are talking about like this entity of me within this physical body that has been here for 30 years.
Yeah.
That all my past that I am tied to
Yeah.
by my memory.
Yeah.
I feel very organically tied to it.
Yes.
But actually I'm just tied to it by memory.
Yeah.
I mean, but that is kind of what we are talking about, I guess, right? I mean, that
Yeah.
is the
That's a good
self,
question. Yeah.
but
So
not my consciousness.
there is the emptiness of the mind. That does actually happen. Yeah. There is a study of the emptiness of the mind, where you actually see the emptiness of the mind. And it gets more subtle. But to start with, yeah, sure. You start with looking at the projection I have of who I am, right? The way I perceive me is a projection that I have onto myself. And we see that in really simple ways, right? Like I can feel like I'm a little overweight and someone else is like, you're totally not overweight. But I'm like, no, I need to like lose a good 10 pounds. But there's a whole idea I have in my own head of how I actually exist and who I am in the world. You know, as like, even for the way that I see myself as with the work that I do, I'm like, oh, I'm not really accomplished. Other people say you're really accomplished. But there's all these different parts that I've identified and created an idea that's become very, very existent. It's unchanging almost in my mind and permanent, that I am this, right? That I have created for myself, that I exist in myself and reinforce in constant ways. You know, I perceive my body to be a certain way, so there are certain things I just can't wear. Like I can't wear a midriff, I don't have the abs for it, whatever that may be, right? Because I perceive myself to have a certain type of thing. That's I reinforce the self-insistent nature of me, even in my body, but also in my awareness too. My mind has your mind, you actually make your mind self-existent as well. There is an emptiness of your mind that happens. I mean, there are times where we actually think, oh, I can't think a different way. It just is this. How is that possible? Of course you can think a different way. Because if things were self-existent, it would be, what's your name? In the back? Jonas. It would be like what Jonas says, there'd be permanence. It would be it wouldn't be change. It couldn't change. It's the way that you perceive yourself is dependent upon something. It's not dependent on nothing. It's dependent on something. It's dependent on your perception.
But I'm not talking about like my mind, the contents of my
Sure.
thoughts or
Yeah.
like the fact that I have an awareness.
Yeah.
Is permanent actually until I die.
Not in this philosophy, but yes, you have an awareness that it's constant. Yeah, sure. That goes from lifetime to lifetime after lifetime.
So that
there's something there, but there is.
That's not permanent.
The mind is constant. It's always there. It never ends.
right? I mean, and that is what gets carried into the next
Sure.
over life.
Sure, but there is an emptiness of the mind. There is an emptiness of the mind. There's actually even, I'll just throw this out there and then we're gonna move on. There is even the emptiness of emptiness. Serious. Because we actually try to self-exist what emptiness even means. You watch it. I mean, the more you do this practice, you'll see that too. But there is the emptiness of the mind.
What does that mean?
You have to practice to do it. We'll do meditations at some point that we can actually start to look at that. But it is interesting.
Cool.
Yeah. There are meditations that you can do to start looking at what that is. What does like there are emptiness meditations that you can do to start looking at what that is. But yeah.
There's a certain amount of time for meditation for a certain type of focus.
Not necessarily. Everyone has different seeds. You know, some people can come in and be practicing for, you know, today and like just get it. And there are people that take years and years or lifetimes. It just depends how you've come in. Sometimes a tricky thing. I was having a conversation with someone of, you know, what's defined as a young practitioner, and you know, it's like 15 years, no 20 years, no 10 years. I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like, you know, it doesn't work that way. Yeah. But the more you practice, the more you'll be able to start having these kinds of questions, because in your practice, you'll start to watch. And that's why shamatha is so interesting, because you do start to hold in place where your mind is and where you feel it. And you'll feel in different ways. Sometimes people feel it in their body. Some people feel it here. Sometimes it moves from inside. Sometimes it's back here. And you'll start to get a sense of focusing on where is your mind. It's fascinating because you don't really do that. You just kind of let it roll. You know, that's what it is. That's what it does. I mean, that's what mine does. And it's interesting when you're sitting and you're like, wait, I'm going to actually try to single pointedly focus on my mind. What is that? How big is that? What does that even look like? How does that feel? You know? Okay. Cool. We're not going to take a break today. We're going to go straight through, and then you guys can break afterwards for your snacks, which actually I have to say is very impressive today. So I'm going to start with a reading from reading 10. I know I asked all of you to actually have a copy of the reading. I'm going to read through it, and then we're going to talk about it in there's different verses that have been outlined. So I'll start from the top, and it's on page 211, if you have the entire reading. So it starts with how to know when your analysis is still incomplete. The third of the 5 sections in our treatment of correct view explains how to know when the analysis you are conducting with the view you have is still incomplete. This point is brought out in the next verse of the root text. You've yet to realize the thought of the able. As long as 2 ideas seem to you disparate, the appearance of things, infallible interdependence, and emptiness beyond taking any position. So that's coming from the scripture, and then what you're seeing after that is going to be the commentary of that. So back then, people could presumably read that little scripture and be like, oh, I get it. And I've heard this in different ways, but basically what I've more or less heard that we've just gotten more stupid over time and need to have it more spelled out. Let's say you meditated on the instructions we've given above. You are directing your view to analyze all phenomena. If your analysis is really complete, then interdependence and emptiness must appear to you to go hand in hand, supporting each other. Despite this fact, it appears that people like some of the ancient Indian sages and the earlier Tibetan Buddhists as well, who made it seem like they had grasped the concept of no self nature, nonetheless, did not understand how to explain interdependence. So interdependence is another way to talk about dependent origination. They're synonymous to each other. What the verse is saying then, concluded our Lama, is this. Suppose you do have some understanding of the 2 concepts individually of 1, the appearance of things or interdependence or dependent origination, right? And 2, emptiness, the fact that nothing exists naturally. But suppose to you they seem like contradictory characteristics. You think that no object could possess one and still possess the other. So here they're basically saying you have emptiness and then you have dependent origination. How do those 2 things, or the appearance of things, interdependence, how do those 2 things coexist? Consider these 2 ideas. Infallible interdependence, where causes, that is actions of a certain kind, must always lead to results, consequences of the same kind. And 2, emptiness, the idea beyond taking any position. The fact that no existent object in the universe contains a single atom of something that can exist on its own. And he ends with, for such time as they appear this way to you, so long as the two ideas seem to you mutually exclusive, then you've yet to realize perfectly the ultimate point of the thought of the able ones, the Buddha. Okay. So the way that Geshe Michael actually did it, it's quite nice. He has a few lines that pretty much sums up that section. So I'm going to go through the 3 lines and then we'll net out at the end of this part. So hang with me or stay with me. Can we say Nangwa, Tendro, Lua, Mepa, Dang.
What page are you on?
Oh,
Oh, you're just reading it.
yeah, I'm just
Sorry.
reading it here. So Nangwa is appearance and deceptive reality. Tendril is dependent origination. Lua is tricky or to fail. Mepa is doesn't. Dong is and. So this is 1 out of 3 verses. I couldn't squeeze them all on a page, so then I decided to just spread them out over 3 slides. This, if I were to summarize this very quickly, it's pretty much the law of appearances. Another way to say it is a law of karma. And basically what this part of the verse is saying is that that appearances around us, they never fail, meaning that in conjunction with dependent origination. So if I were to summarize that, it basically is saying that karma never fails. So this line is about talking just specifically to the idea that karma never fails. The laws of karma never fails. Okay? That if you understand the laws of karma, when you have a projection that comes up, when you see your angry boss yelling at you, and for you to see your boss as being angry, right? And upsetting you, when that rises, that's something that's forced upon you. And that has to do with the laws of karma. That has to do with your karma that you planted in the past. That's forced upon you to perceive and project the world the way that you do. Okay. Second one is, can we say Tongpa? Kalen? Drelwa? Gowa? Ni. Tongpa is emptiness. Kalen is beyond. Drelwa is any position. Goa is understanding. I guess it's Drelway. Yeah. Goa, understandings, and Ni is 2. So if we continue here on the second part of this verse, and connecting it to the first verse, is that what we're basically saying is that the 2 understandings of karma and emptiness, 2 understandings, right, of karma never fails and emptiness, those 2, and then we'll go to the last one and I'll summarize it. Can we say Jiso?
Jiso.
Sosor? Nangwa? Desidu. GC. Did I say Jisu?
Yeah.
GC is as long as. Sosar is unconnected. Nangwa is appear. Desidu is for that long. So if we were to bring those 3 together, it's saying that as long as the 2 understandings of the law of karma and emptiness appear unconnected for that long, dot, dot, dot. I'm sorry, it's 4 lines, not 3. 4 lines, just kidding. Can we say Dadung, Tupe, Gongpa, Tokpa, Me. Dadu is still. Tupe, the Buddhas. Gongpa, real idea. Tokpa, realized. May is not. So then if you were to stitch all these verses together, these parts of the verses together, you would have that those two ideas, the two understandings, for as long as the two understandings that the law of karma and emptiness appear unconnected, for that long, you still will not have realized the ideas of the Buddhas. Okay. Or another way you can say it is, you still have not realized the ideas of the Buddhas as long as those two understandings, karma and emptiness, seem unconnected. Okay. So basically this is saying,
Do you have that on a slide or no?
no, but I can say it again. Basically you're looking at how does karma and emptiness, how are they connected? And if you think that they're unconnected, then you're not understanding the concept. Mhm.
Karma's kind of dependent on being empty for having emptiness, right?
Well, yeah. So how is karma and emptiness connected?
Because your projections have to do with your karma.
That's right.
They're like
Yeah.
a direct result.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, because your
Just say the whole
projections.
statement again.
Yeah, I can say it. Yeah, I'll say the easier way. You still have not realized the ideas of the Buddhas as long as those two understandings which would be karma and emptiness, seem unconnected. Can we say it again?
No.
Are you sure? Okay. So that's right. That the way that they're connected is because when you do see your angry boss appear, you know, that the minute that person appears that way, that you're projecting something is being projected onto your boss, and that projection comes from your past karmas. That's forced upon you to be perceiving it that way. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Gia, no?
Just trying to think it through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So another way to think of it is when I talked about arrogance, right? It's impossible to see arrogance in someone if it wasn't a seed that you have in your mind. It's impossible to see frustration in someone if you don't have that seed in your mind, or jealousy, you know? If you don't have that seed, you don't have that seed. You can't see it in that way.
So, say you're like enlightened and you are free of all mental afflictions. Do you
Not see anger.
Yeah, is that because you've erased all your angry karma?
Yeah, that's interesting. So they'll say, I've heard it different ways, but basically when you reach a level of, it's tricky. When you reach that level of, when you reach enlightenment, you don't see samsara the way that you see the way that we see samsara. Doesn't mean that the Buddha doesn't have compassion for seeing us in our samsaric nature, but they don't experience it in that same way because you don't, to your point, you don't have that seed. Samsara and bliss almost become equal. Because how we define samsara and bliss in our minds now, right, comes from very much a self-existent place, right? So it's hard. It's almost like trying to talk about it without the projections that we have of what bliss and samsara mean to us. Yeah. Okay. 2 lines here. Second point. Namshik, Ranjo, Mepar, Chikchardu, Tendril, Milu, Tongwa, Samnine, Neshe, Yulgi, Zingtang, Kunjikna. Jikna. Namshik, at some point, Renjo, unrelated. Mepar, not. Chikchardu, at once. Tendril, that's dependent origination, which we just saw. Milu, never fails. Tongwa, seeing. Samnine, just by. Neshe, certainty. Yogi, at once. Singta, the way it holds. Kun, it dissolves. So this summarizes too, at some point, these 2 ideas, emptiness and karma, are not unrelated. And one will appear at once when the other one, when you think of the other. Interesting translations. I think it's really is that it dissolves. The separation of the 2, it dissolves, and you see that they are basically 2 sides of the coin. Mm-hmm. In the scripture on page 213, it says, how you know when your analysis is complete. And this is what it speaks to. This brings us to the 4th section, how to know when the analysis you are performing with the view you've developed is complete. This is explained in the next verse of the root text. At some point, they no longer alternate, come together. Just seeing that interdependence never fails, but realization that destroys how you hold to objects. And then your analysis with view is complete. Now, here's what we mean when we say that. At some point, they no longer alternate. We take 2 things. First, the fact that everything about the way things work and about good deeds and bad deeds is perfectly proper, despite the fact that no single object is anything more than label, just names. Secondly, there is a fact that when we try to seek out the thing that got the name, we find only emptiness, that there is not a single atom of natural existence in whatever object we have chosen. At some point, you gain an ability to explain these 2 facts so they come together and no longer alternate. That is, you come to realize how both emptiness and interdependence can apply to one and the same object with no contradiction at all. Okay. So what the scriptures are saying is that when you start to realize that those 2 don't conflict and you can understand how they actually work hand in hand with each other, is when you're starting to get and understand that you are getting the concept. The minute you separate those 2, it doesn't function, it doesn't work. It's not enough to understand just karma alone. Like if you want to do virtue, for instance, it's not enough to just understand karma alone. You have to understand emptiness in order to have virtue, to actually change your mindset. Okay, and so you can think about that.
Jake, could you repeat the definition of emptiness again, or is that one?
What emptiness means? The idea that we're saying with emptiness is that nothing self-existently exists. There's no self-existent nature in anything. So if you are looking to be a better person, for instance, or change the way you think with just one part of the equation, with karma, like, oh, I understand how karma works, good produces good, bad produces bad. That's the idea that I've heard. That's the basic fundamental understanding. Okay, you have that, but that's not enough for you to actually change your behavior. It doesn't work that way. Because when you start to realize how that's infused with how that informs with what's happening in the moment when someone is screaming at you, then when you understand that that is what is giving you that information to project onto somebody who that person is, because that person is empty of their self-existent nature, they're empty of themselves, then you can start to understand how things are and how things function, and that will truly change the way your mind works and thinks. Okay.
It's just funny because the definition of emptiness is kind of the opposite of it.
In what?
To me, that's how it sounds like. The idea
There's
of-
nothing.
Right, how we think of emptiness is nothingness. Whereas the definition you gave, which makes sense, is that we prescribe something to nothing. Not nothing, but something.
Right.
We prescribe something
Yeah.
that means something to us.
Well, there's something there.
Yeah,
It's just not what you think it's there. That's
Right.
the dependent origination on that crap that you put onto this object.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I lose my screen. I'm out of power. You guys just like drained me. That's okay. We don't need that. That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah. It's the minute that we start moving around, and the minute we start moving around at any time, and you can see it too. When you in your life, the minute you grasp at anything, and you'll watch it. Grasping is fascinating. I've been watching it this last week in particular, what I grasp at. And it could be anything from sitting in meditation being like, I have to itch. I have to itch. Oh my God, that itch is getting so big. I need to itch. Should I not, and I'm grasping at this desire of wanting to itch my leg or my nose. And then, and I watch it and I'm like, okay, just satisfy the stupid itch. And I satisfy the itch. And then there's another one. And then there's another one. And it just keeps like, there's this, thing that keeps, I watch my mind grasping at having to fulfill this need. The grasping nature that we have of even things that we think will satisfy us, right? In small or big ways. Any type of thing that you see in the world that creates any level of affliction, your afflictions rise from your grasping of things self-existently. All of your anxiety, all of your fears, all of your anger, all of that comes up with you actually looking at whatever it is self-existently, as if it existed on its own, that it's making you feel a certain way or making you be a certain way, instead of understanding that it's coming from here, right? That itch isn't making me feel itchy. It's actually coming from here, where I'm like, ooh, that's an itch. And I watch it because that itch becomes another itch, it feeds it. But if I actually let the itch sit, and if you ever do this in meditation, just let it sit. And in shamatha, it's most fascinating because you can let it sit and you watch the itch and the desire to itch. And then it will kind of have this trajectory where it feels that way and it will go away. It just goes away. So if the itch was self-existent, it would always be itchy, but it's not. Not.
Let's say in the real case example where you have a really narcissistic boss.
Yes.
Who constantly kind of behaves in a kind of volatile or angry manner towards you.
Yeah.
In the instance that you said, let that itch sit. In that example.
Yes.
How do you apply that in a workplace environment where you're constantly being subject to something?
Yeah. So in a moment like that, the way the practice would work in a very practical way, when you see your boss, you see that you first understand that your boss is empty, right? He or she, whatever, your boss is empty of their own self nature. And once you understand that that person that you create, that's your boss, is empty and they have no self nature, then you start to realize that you are projecting something onto that person, right? So you say, okay, angry boss, I'm projecting an angry boss onto this person, or a narcissistic boss onto this person, right? And I'm then at that point, you actually can start to look at like, okay, that's a projection that's coming from my mind, that's forced upon me from my past karmas. There's something that I have created in my past life, in my life or my past life, that has somehow informed me in a certain way to project this boss, the way this boss is behaving, as being narcissistic. And when you understand that that's a projection coming from your mind, what it does at the very least is when your boss is being that way, you neutralize and you don't actually respond to that. Because that's like you trying to fist fight with like a projection of Trump screaming at you. You just let it pass. At the very least, what happens is that you're not planting more seeds by arguing with your boss and creating more afflictions for you down the future. On a very conventional way, you will actually be more at peace, to be honest. But that's the practice, is that you look at it and you're like, oh, I'm watching, he's pissed. I realize I'm labeling this person as narcissistic, that is a projection coming from my mind that's forced upon me. I wish it wasn't, but it is. I can't control it, but it is something that's forced upon me to feel the way that I feel. That's valid. All that perception is valid. But knowing that information, how do you then respond to that projection? And that's where you do the work. Because the moment that you actually have that projection and you crystallize it into actually being a fact, you fucked yourself. You fucked yourself, because now he's a narcissistic boss. And whenever you see his picture, it's narcissistic boss to you. Mm-hmm. And that exists to you self-existently forever and ever and ever. And it's not true, because there's someone else in the world that thinks that he's actually quite amazing and fabulous.
Himself.
Well, that's, you know. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's hard. This is really hard. Yeah, it's a hard practice. But that's why also you actually do the practice on your cushion, because you practice rehearsing it. I remember when I was first learning the process, I'm like, this is bullshit. I can't do it. And I had a teacher say to me, I want you to practice that thought process with your boss. And I would do it. And I would just, it's like I trained my mind almost during meditation so that I can create these reflexes, you know, when I know that she would speak a certain way, it would just be like, emptiness, right? You know, I'd be like, shut up, don't talk, you know. But I would actually practice in my visualization, you know, almost like dreaming, you know, of what it would look like if I did have this concept in mind, and habituate my mind in that, so that when it actually did happen, it almost kind of just triggered something for my mind to be a lot more understanding of what was going on. But it doesn't necessarily mean that I actually engage well. Sometimes I just have to like lock myself in the bathroom and be like, don't talk, you know. But at least I didn't perpetuate more negative karma. You know, that's the very least. Yeah.
So you could still be irked and offended, but it's how you react.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to get irked and offended. That's going to happen until it stops happening, until you really understand how these concepts work together, you know. But at the very least, start practicing and taking a step and saying, okay, I am pissed. He's such a douche. I don't know how to deal. I like to do it this way, but I'm going to try at the very least to employ my understanding of wisdom that I've learned. And you start there. And you start to actually look at the time span from when you get really pissed off and then when you actually activate that aggression. And as you start to practice, that time gets longer and longer and longer. It just does. Like for me, I remember just being like, it's instant. And then over time, it's like, oh, it was like I waited a second longer, which was a huge, like for a huge deal for me, just to be like, 1 second, you know. But then it just becomes longer and longer and longer, and even times where I don't even have to. There are times where I don't even have to say that I act because I might have been short with someone. I wasn't angry, but short, and I can now take a moment and be like, oh, that wasn't nice. I know myself to know that wasn't very nice. And it wasn't an aggressive act, but it wasn't. I know, like, you know what I mean. Like you feel that, and you feel that as you start to try to make the attempt of purifying yourself, you at least understand the subtleties of what that looks like. Then it becomes more than just being good and saying please and thank you and making eye contact, which is all great things, you know. But then it becomes also just, you know, just being impatient. Like what? What? You know? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Actually, that was the last slide. So the last thing I wanted to end with is the last part of the scripture, the reading. It talks about practice, and he goes in depth about some different practices that you can have. There's two that he has in particular. One, he has a preliminary, and in the preliminaries, he talks about the immeasurables. And I wanted to go over the immeasurables in particular because I felt like it's a really beautiful practice. It's something that I think can be very beneficial for all of you. It's also written on the back. If you look on page 245, it's in there as well. But I'm going to also summarize it in a way that I think might be easier to apply. So there's what's called the immeasurables. It's also known as the 4 immeasurables. And the 4 different ones that you will traditionally hear will be loving kindness is the first one.
The 4 measurables?
Yeah, 4 immeasurables. IMMEASURABLE. And in the scriptures, he talks about, you know, great loving kindness and great compassion and the difference of the two. But there's loving kindness. It's the first one, which we've talked about in class what that means. There's compassion as the second one. There's joy as the third one. And there's neutrality or equanimity as the fourth one. And in the scriptures, the way it's broken down, it says it like this. May all living beings gain happiness and what causes happiness, which is for loving kindness. May all living beings escape suffering and what causes suffering. May all living beings never be without the happiness free of every suffering. May all living beings stay neutral, free of all like for their friends and dislike for their enemies. And in particular, I'm going to give you a practice that you can do every day as a meditation if you like, or just think about it or even write about it. That works too. But I was given this during, it was shared during the retreat I was last week, and I thought it was really lovely the way Alan Wallace spoke about it, and I thought it was very practical and applicable. And it was, just to give you a little bit of background, a student had asked Alan about, you know, how do I actually, coming from a great deal of trauma, and this student in particular, trauma he was talking about was being abused as a child, being in a domestic a relationship with domestic violence, and then also living in a war-torn country. A lot of stuff. And like 1 out of the 3 is a lot. 3 out of 3 is really something.
But do you want to explain what Alan Wallace is?
Yeah, they
have you already?
Yeah. Alan Wallace is the teacher that I had a retreat with last week for a week in Garrison Institute, who is teaches in the Nyingma and the Galupa tradition, and we were being taught specifically shamatha and vipassana based on what's called the Dzogchen practice. So his question to Alan in particular was, how, for someone like me who's had so much trauma, how do I even begin to take part in a practice like this? Like, where do I even start? You know, I mean, it's a lot of traumatic things that come up for me, and what does that look like for me? And the answer he gave was beautiful, not just to him, but I felt like it was applicable to everybody. That I'm going to share with you. The first one he said with loving kindness is to start with yourself. And this really, the way he used the four measurables in particular was, how do you cultivate things for yourself? How do you cultivate a practice for yourself? What does that look like? So the first thing was really start with yourself and learning to know how to love yourself first. And we've heard that before, right? But the truth is that if you don't really understand how to love yourself, it's going to be very difficult for you to love anybody else. We've heard that from modern psychology. We've heard that on Instagram posts. We've heard that in class now, and the Buddha has talked about it. And so a question you can ask here while you contemplate this idea of how to love yourself is, what in your heart would make you happy? What would truly make you happy? You know, what realization do you have that would give you your heart's desire? And you can actually have fun with this idea too, with what that could be. It doesn't have to be like a limited thing, you know, but just what would the things be that would really make you happy, bring you happiness as it comes to mind? And you take some time and you think to yourself and you give yourself that and you say, may it be so, that you can have all these things that you want, you know? Because the first part of loving kindness is, may all living beings gain happiness and what causes happiness. So you're giving that to yourself. May it be so that I can have all the happiness that I want and the causes to be able to create that happiness for me. Yeah. The second one is holding in for compassion. You start to get practical and you hold in vision of what are the things that you need to cultivate your happiness to happen. And you can be very practical about it. What are the things that the world needs to give you in order for you to have your happiness achieved? What are all the elements and things that need to happen? Outer world, right? So in the scriptures, it's, may all living beings escape suffering and what causes suffering. So you're basically trying to look at a way of, how do I actually create the causes to alleviate, right? To take away the suffering of my life. What are the things that I need to be able to make me happy, right? And the third thing is looking at internally, inner transformation. And it's, how would you love to transform yourself in order to have the things that you would want? To be able to free yourself from the suffering that you're in. What would that transformation, what would that inner transformation be? You know? What would need to happen inside, right? So now you have outer things that need to happen to get your happiness, and what's the inner thing that needs to happen? Because you can have all the outer stuff, but you know well enough now in this class that there's something inside that needs to also shift, potentially, right? And then the last one is realizing and understanding that you don't live in isolation in this world, you know, that you're not by yourself, that the problem that you have is most definitely shared amongst other people around you. Probably people in this room, in fact. Probably with everyone that you work with. Probably with most of the people in the city and this country and in this world. So in fact, if that's true, understanding that equanimity, what is it that you would want to give to those people who are suffering from the same thing that you are? How would you want to give them a piece of happiness? What would you want to do for them to be able to reach their ultimate happiness? Okay. And while you do this too, try not to ruminate on the past so much. Like, well, in the past, and this, it's not that. It's really much looking and staying focused on the future. Understand the past has happened. It has, and close that door and move on and stay focused on the future. Okay. The practice is one that needs to be done that's conducive to a certain space. You have to have that, right? You have to have the time to do it. You have to have a place that's peaceful and safe for you to do it. There's all these elements that need to come in play for you to actually do these practices. But one thing to also keep in mind is to have faith in yourself that you actually are all incredibly able to achieve all these things that we talk about in this class. Completely, absolutely able. That it's not just an idea that's up here that you're not, it's like, oh, maybe someday. It's not like that. And the Dalai Lama talks about a situation where he had students for 10, 15, 20 years, where some of his students that had been there for 10 years were getting frustrated because they felt like they weren't moving. They're like, and His Holiness would say, I noticed that you guys have been, some of you in this room have been my disciples, and you are not moving in your practice, and you're frustrated. You're not getting where you want to go, And he would say, it's not that you're doing the only thing that it's not being done properly is that you don't have faith in yourself. You have faith in the Buddha, you have faith in the Dharma, and you have faith in the Sangha, but you don't have faith in you. And so it's something to think about while you're doing these practices. And it's something that you think about actually, even in a very conventional sense, how you actually live in the world. All the things that you want in this world are absolutely obtainable. But how much of you and the projection that you have of how you exist in the world gets in that way? Probably most of the time. Because if you're able to change and shift your axes just slightly, the perception you have of you and your reality changes drastically, actually. It doesn't take that much, actually. And you can shift more, So that's the practice, is shifting your mindset just slightly. And practice in that and see what that does and see if that changes and test it out. If you're doing these practices and it's pissing you off more and you're being more aggravated and you're more of a bitch and an asshole, you're not doing the practice right, or the teachings are wrong, right? Because it only can result in you actually doing more virtue. And if that's not happening, examine what's happening. Is it you and you're not doing it right? Or is the teaching wrong? Because if the teaching's wrong, get out. You don't want to be a part of that. Don't pollute your mind. Yeah? Okay. Let's close. I don't have the projection, but I have my. I don't have battery.
It's not the same. It's not the same charger.
You can hum it along. Do you know it?
I know it, but do you want to do it?
Yeah, of course.
Sashi
Puri Jushin Meto Tram Viragin Shri Ningde Yamadi Sangye Shindu Nite Uvargi Jokun Namda Shinga Duparsho Idam Ratnamandalakam Yatayami Dimuku Sunam Yeshe Susoshi Sunam Yeshe Lejunwe Dampa Kunit Goparsho sit in a meditative position and we're just going to rejoice and dedicate. Just take a moment and applaud and commend yourself and rejoice for spending 2.5 hours in class tonight with the intention of wanting to live a more virtuous and ethical life. And dedicate that rejoice that you've given yourself to your highest goals and aspirations. Thank you. It got warm in here.